What is the meaning of your life? That's a big question, right? And I'm sure you've already done a lot of thinking about this, and you might even have a really good idea. The meaning of your life might be spending time with your family. The meaning of your life might be to build a giant business that helps and serves a ton of people. Or the meaning of your life might be to be a part of your local community and make a difference locally and help those that you truly care about in your local area. The reality is, the meaning of your life is going to be different than the person next to you and the person next to them because you are unique. You have a uniqueness about you. You have natural abilities. You have things that you've learned throughout your life. You have a passion, and you have, most importantly, a unique story that must be told, and that will help a lot of people. And today, we're going to be talking about how you can find new meaning in your life, whether you have a great idea or whether you are trying to figure that out. And to do that, we're speaking to our guest expert. He's a new friend of mine. We met last month. His name is Faolan Sugerman-Lash, and he is the author of a new book called Why Live? The Beautiful and Painful Mess of Learning to Love Life. He has an incredible story. I found him from LinkedIn, actually. And if you just go read his story in his LinkedIn About section, it's incredible. But we're going to talk about it here as well. But before we get to talking with Faolan, you know the fee for watching the broadcast. We don't run ads. We don't have sponsors because we don't want to interrupt your viewing experience. So all we ask is when you take away a piece of value, when you learn something new, when you feel inspired from the conversation, whatever it is, simply share this show with just one person who could use it the most. That's all we ask, and that's how our show has been able to grow the way it has to over 170 episodes, and it's growing daily because of you, because you are part of the team. So thank you so much for that. And without further ado, let's talk to Faolan. And for those who don't know Faolan, he is on a mission to revolutionize mental and spiritual health by reimagining what gives life meaning. Faolan is a newly published author, and when he's not writing, he's working with clients as a professional life coach. Trained by the Coaches Training Institute, he joins clients on their journeys of healing and creation. Faolan's a world traveler and is an avid supporter of the arts, and you can always find him outside with a good book or on a hike. He is the founder of the business SoFlo.co. Faolan, it is a pleasure to have you here with us, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I loved our conversation when we talked last month. And your story it's just a compelling story. And the fact that you travel the world, you see a lot of great places, you're very in tune with nature, and you talk a lot about spirituality. And that is a journey that I discovered and started embarking on when I was 21 or 22 years old. And it's made a profound difference in my life. And I'm excited to talk with you about your book. So first of all, congratulations on your new book.
Woo! Thank you.
For those listening, again, the name is Why Live? The Beautiful and Painful Mess of Learning to Love Life. And how would you describe this book when you tell people about this? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so this book is really supposed to be a mirror for readers. So it's my story of kind of coming to terms with my own reality, with the trauma that I had in my life from growing up, and then working through that in ways that made the unconscious conscious. And that took a lot of work. It took going inside and figuring out, like, who am I, what matters to me, and am I actually living out my life in alignment with who I am on the inside. And so that was kind of the first, I don't know, like 22 or 23 years of my life. And then I pulled that out afterward and was like, okay, I have to apply this. I have to actually like take these learnings from the inside and apply it outside. So the book is my story over the first years of my life. And it's really meant to mirror the opportunity that each one of us has to reflect on ourselves and our own lives and ask ourselves, why live? And why am I here? And the name of the book is really important to me because for the first, I don't know, 21 years of my life, 22 years of my life, the why live was a dark question. It was really like, oh, like, why live? Like, why? This kind of sucks. And then through all of the spiritual stuff that I found and the work and the reflection, it became, why live? Like, why am I here? And that question is just a lot more powerful, but it's the same words. It's the same idea. It's just, are you looking at it in a way of like, being alone and not having meaning, or are you looking at it in a way of like, I matter, I'm here for a reason? So that's kind of the story that I want to mirror for other people.
That's beautiful. When you were growing up and you asked yourself that question, why live, you got a very different answer than when you were, like you said, 22, 23, and then you asked yourself that question. So I guess, when did you start asking yourself that question in the first place, when you first started getting the answer?
Yeah. So I guess when I was like, basically, I'll just give you a little run through of kind of my life. So my parents separated when I was 8 months old, and then I kind of grew up in the tension of being a part of different families and having different like worldviews. And that left me feeling pretty alone in my life, which was kind of the primary trauma. And then until about 11 or 12. Also, let me just quickly define trauma. So
Please.
Trauma is anything that makes us like live our lives in ways that aren't intentional or that are bad. It's like stuff inside us that came from past pain that we haven't resolved yet or faced yet. And it could be anything from something really small to something really big. And I think that's worth talking about maybe later.
Yeah.
But for me, that was my trauma, and it kind of stayed under the surface until around 11. And then at around 11 years old, I started to just feel really alone. I transferred from a nice like community private school to public school and just started getting bullied, and not like I didn't feel like I could be myself. And so that was really when things started going downhill. From 11 to about 19, I had to kind of just become this automaton, like, you know, walking around, maintaining images, like doing well in school, playing sports. Like I felt like I needed to be someone who I wasn't really. And my biggest passion when I was growing up was Magic the Gathering. And I didn't tell anyone about it because I was so embarrassed to just be who I was. And so there was this cognitive dissonance of, this is who I am, but this is who I show to the world. And then around 19, I was at college, and I went for a walk late at night because I was feeling really bad. And I ended up climbing up on top of these monkey bars and just sitting there. And then all of a sudden this thought hit me, and I was like, whoa, like, why am I here? Why am I alive? And it ended up being this panic attack that I kind of had, where I would just like panic and then like shake and have a lot of anxiety. And then I would calm down, and it showed me that I didn't know, like I didn't have an answer to that question of why live or why am I here? And that was the first moment that I really had to investigate myself and say, okay, I don't know the answer to this question, so I should probably go figure that out.
And what does that look like when you go to figure that out? Like, how did you even know where to begin?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a process of following intuition for me. But intuition is kind of a tricky beast because it's very similar to the feeling of fear. And so it takes a lot of discernment and stillness to kind of figure out what's the difference between intuition and what's the difference between fear. But the biggest thing for me was just diving into life. So about 3 weeks after that, I was reading a book called The Happiness of Pursuit by Chris Gilbow. And that book is all about how humans need to go on these big quests to feel really fulfilled. And I was lying in my hammock, and I finished the book, and I just started sobbing. And I didn't really know why I was sobbing at first, but then over the minutes lying in my hammock in public, just like total tears, I realized that the answer was that I needed to go travel. I needed to go do some big quest, and that I would find whatever answers I was looking for out in the world, doing what I had always wanted to do. And so I walked straight from the hammock to my boss's office, quit my job as an RA, and then walked to the registrar, withdrew from school, went home. I had like 2 more days of this quarter of school. I packed up my entire room, flew home, and then bought a round trip ticket to Vietnam.
Oh my God.
And I had never been traveling outside the country. I'd never really been outside the country. And it was all within this like 1 or 2 week span where I was just like, well, time for a change, time to do something different. Like, this isn't working. I feel sad. I don't feel fulfilled. Like, I need to go try something else. So I spent like all of my savings and just went backpacked around the world, or around Southeast Asia, at least for 6 weeks. And
how old were you at this point?
Oh, 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you've never done anything like this before?
No.
This was like a new alien thing for you to do.
Totally. Yeah.
But you
Not
knew
even
it was the
close.
right thing to do. Like, did you quit your job and leave school in the same day?
Within the same 20 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's inspiring though, for you to know so strongly that that was not the path that you wanted to go. And you
Yeah.
totally did a 180. Like, went from your
Yeah.
life to going to Vietnam. How did you choose Vietnam, by the way?
Honestly, I just had a friend there, so it was kind of a safe landing place to go be with someone who had some more experience than me.
Yeah. And you started diving into life at that moment.
Yeah.
Would you say that was the moment you really took the dive?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to like touch on the person being there, because I think that's a big way that I live life, is like, it's really good to take risks and follow intuition with a safety net. And so I always try to have a safety net or a backup plan, or just be strategic about how I'm taking these big leaps, because it is a big leap to quit your job, withdraw from school, and then travel around the world at 19 with no plan. Like, yeah. So it's good to just have like someone else and community and support, and ask for help. Asking for help is huge.
I think that support can be found even if it's not physically there, because if I haven't known you long, but just for how long I have known you, I feel that if you had gone to Vietnam and you didn't have a friend there, like let's say you decided to go to Hong Kong instead, right?
Yeah.
Would you say you would have figured it out if you did just go there anyway?
Probably. One of the most important things that happened in Vietnam is I left my friend after a few days, and I went and stayed in this hostel, and I just felt, there was actually a moment where I was sitting and journaling up on a balcony, and I had just talked to these two girls, and they were going out to dinner, and I was like, oh, can I come with you? Because I didn't have any friends or know anyone. And they were like, yeah, of course, we'll come get you. And then I was sitting journaling on this balcony, and I watched these two girls leave for dinner without coming to get me. And it was this moment of like, oh shit, like if I don't do this for myself, if I don't like make friends and make my life happen the way I want it to, like people aren't going to do that for me. Which was kind of sad. But then on the other hand, it was really empowering. And it was like, okay, I need to make friends. Like that's the most important thing traveling, is to just go and meet people and build genuine connections, not from a way of feeling like you need the other person, but from a way of like connection. And I think that is something we can get into later in my story too, if you want, because it's super relevant.
The impact of connection on your life.
Yeah. Versus like clinging or needing someone for well-being.
Okay, cool. We'll definitely touch on that.
We could just jump in now, or take it wherever you
want. I was just going to say, and I would love to, I was just going to say, your story, while it's vastly different than mine, it's similar in the same way. Like I had always grown up as a fat kid, right? And I'd always grown up very self-conscious about myself until I was about 16 years old, and I lost a ton of weight, but in my mind, I was still a fat kid. And I had all these interests. Like I was a heavy gamer, like heavy physically, but also I was playing games all the time. Like I played World of Warcraft, RuneScape, and all these things, but I was so afraid to tell people. And I think what made it even worse is I had a friend who was actually a popular kid at school. We were very close friends, but he played the games as well with me, but he didn't tell any of his friends. So I'm thinking, well, in order to be popular, I can't tell anyone that I do these taboo things, just like with you and Magic, right? It's funny you say Magic. My brother actually used to play Magic the Gathering all the time, and I used to go to his bedroom and like take his cards because they were so artsy and beautiful, the artwork in that game. And it was very similar for me, and I didn't actually begin to, what you called, come to terms with my own reality. I wrote that down because I loved that. I never came to terms with my own reality until I had a mentor actually come into my life, which speaks to the essence of connection and community, like you said. And I decided to dive into life at that point. I was 21. We were right around the same age. And I started working on my physical body, doing new things, playing basketball with our sales team at the time. Never played basketball in my life, really. And I started trying new things. I didn't move to a different country. That sounds really cool. But I did things even locally, and I tried new things. I discovered new things. I dove into different aspects. And I think it's really important. I mean, we're 15 minutes into this, but you've already dropped a lot of things where someone could literally leave right now and say to themselves, I'm going to do one new thing that brings me outside of my comfort zone, that causes me to grow and either become a more skilled version of myself or become a more diverse version of
Yeah,
myself who has discovered things about myself that I didn't even know. Like when you went to Vietnam, what would you say you discovered about yourself while you were there that you didn't know prior?
sure. It's a great question, and I'm going to answer it kind of roundabout. So Vietnam, I went to Vietnam, Indonesia, and Laos. And it's kind of funny because I was going to answer this question of why am I alive? Why am I here? And I totally didn't. I was there and I just kind of, was a 19-year-old boy and drank and went on adventures, and it was awesome. It was so fun, but it wasn't like a spiritually transformative time for me, but more just like freeing. Like it showed me that I could actually be free. I could go choose something for myself that no one else around me was choosing and do it. And I guess that is a really important thing that I learned, just the power of intentional action.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't answer the question, why live, for me.
So have you ever been able to answer that question?
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just like keep going through the next like steps of
Please.
my journey? Okay.
Yes.
And then we can kind of come back and touch on things. So after going to Asia, I came back and went straight back into school, which was a return to this earlier form of life of trying to do the right thing and keep going. And I ended up graduating, long story short. But in that moment, I had so much melancholy, which is a word that is really powerful because it's not quite depression, but it's just like, is this it? This sucks. And I remember writing this poem called I don't remember shit, but basically just like about falling apart and being like, is this really it? Is there not more to life? And I was waiting at that point because I knew I was going abroad to New Zealand in like 3 months after I returned from Asia, and I was going to study abroad in New Zealand for 4 months. And so I was waiting for that. And I was like, okay, I'm waiting for the next phase of my life to enjoy it. And that sneak peek never works. Like the present is all we have. So you have to be present with the joy that's here or the pain that's here. And that is a big cash out of the book and my life and my story is, if you're living in the past or the future, it's not fulfilling. Anyway, so I went to New Zealand, and New Zealand, as soon as I got there, it went from like 80 degrees in California and sunny to, I don't know, like 39 degrees, raining and cloudy. And I always had seasonal depression. And then I also just felt so alone and in a new culture. And it was immediate depression, like staggering, more than I had ever had before. And I stayed in bed until like 1 or 2 in the afternoon and just like didn't do anything except for go out and drink too much. And I like totally ran away into addictions, which brings up another thing that I kind of want to talk about, which is just, this podcast that we're doing today is all about finding meaning in life. And at that point in my life, I was looking for meaning outside myself, mostly by way of validation, and specifically like sexual validation. So I ended up, for the first 2 years of college, feeling like I needed that validation in order to have meaning in my life. And how you talked about earlier, when you lost weight but still felt like the fat guy inside, like for me, I grew up and was maturing but still felt like this really shy, unworthy 16-year-old or 17-year-old who I was when I was younger. And so in New Zealand, I drank too much and I hooked up with too many people, and I just totally was looking for everything in the wrong places. And then I listened to a podcast, actually, which is why I'm such a big believer in podcasts and how the good that they can do. I listened to a podcast with this author named Aziz Gazipura, who wrote a book called Not Nice, which is all about how to stop people pleasing and be authentic. And I heard the podcast and was just like, oh my God, this is what I need to read. And so I went and bought the book and just spent the next month or so reading this book, spending so much time on each of the activities that he gave. And that book literally dragged me through the muck of my own existence, brought me out the other side, and was like, here's life again. And that allowed me to investigate myself in ways that I had never done before, ask myself really big questions like, what is my bill of rights for myself? What do I allow myself to do in this world? And another book that I was reading at around the same time was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which that book is amazing. I don't really have the words for it. It's just such a beautiful story of becoming one's true self, even in the face of so much societal skepticism. And I don't want to give away the ending, but everything I'm talking about is getting to this one moment in New Zealand where I was sitting on a bench in the botanical gardens. I had just finished reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I'd finished reading Not Nice. I also read Steve Jobs' biography. So all of these different like people who were just themselves, and that was the answer. And I was sitting on a bench and looking up kind of in the distance, and I finished the book and started crying again, which is always a big sign when you start crying just from a book. Like, take note of what's there. And I walked into the woods in the botanical gardens, and I looked up at the leaves. And in this moment, I had so much clarity and so much, like, I saw everything so clearly, not metaphorically, but literally. And then all of a sudden, I felt this sensation as if my soul just like kathunked back into my chest after almost 10 years of being someone else, of trying to be someone else. It was as if I had literally come back to myself. And that moment was the biggest pivot point in my life so far. It was a moment when I went from being someone else to being me. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know why I live yet, but I just had this trust in myself that it was going to be okay because I was back and I was me. And it's really like a mystical experience. I don't really know how to describe it without using, spiritual terms, which is kind of why I went down a spiritual path after that.
Wow.
Okay. I just talked a lot.
No, I think that's great. And I had a similar experience actually about a year ago now, maybe a little bit less than a year, where my friend and I talk about this openly. We had a psychedelic experience and awesome. we did mushrooms, and I have videos on my YouTube channel about this stuff. So if anyone's interested, you can go check it out. But during that experience, it was so profound because number one, I had no expectation of what was going to happen. I'm not someone I don't drink, I don't do drugs, things like that. So I did this, and I wouldn't even call this a drug as much as it is a medicine or even a gateway, because we did this. And at a point in the journey of the psychedelic, for those who've never done that, it's like a 6 to 8 hour experience, depending on the kind you do. And about 4 hours in, I just felt so zen. You leave your body. So it felt like I wasn't even in my body. And it felt as if I was whatever we call this thing that we call God or the universe. But I just felt one with everything. And my friend was experiencing the same exact thing. And I felt in that moment two very specific things. One is exactly what you just said. Everything is going to be okay. No matter what. Everything is going to work out the way that it's meant to work out. And the second thing I learned in that moment, it was like a knowingness, like not even a learning, but as much of a, I just knew it to be true.
Yep.
And there was no doubt. It was factual. And that was, there's no need for urgency is what I learned. Cause I've always been this person who's been, even now, like I'm still like urgent, but less so, because in that moment I realized I've just been going, but it's not about achieving more. Like nothing is urgent. I've learned nothing is urgent. Even when my wife picked us up that night, she was stressed out because she wanted to get home, and she comes in and she's got dinner in the car, and she's like, all right, you ready to go? Let's go. And I was like, Bree, just sit down for a second for me. And she did. And I was like, it's going to be okay. Nothing is urgent. And in that moment, she probably hated me in that moment, but it just helped me to see when others are chasing after this thing and they're constantly running, when what you said earlier, all we have is this present moment right now.
Yeah. It's a good present moment right now.
It is. Your story it's very different than other people I've talked to, because you've experienced a lot being so young. Like you've seen so many more places than I've seen. You've gone out on a limb more than I've gone out on a limb. Like, so let's talk about after that then. Okay. So you have this moment and you just know now everything's going to be okay. What happens after?
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you for sharing about your psychedelic experience. And we should definitely talk about psychedelics later, which
Okay, cool.
it's important.
It could
Yeah.
even be another
Yeah.
episode in the future.
Cool. Yeah. So after New Zealand, the first thing that happened was I just really started enjoying my life for the rest of my trip. I went on backpacking trips. I started running. I just like enjoyed making bread, like very simple things that gave me a lot of meaning because I was just curious and I followed my innate curiosity. Like, how do I bake a bread? It's something I just never had done before, like you were talking about with basketball. And so that was the first part. The second thing that happened was I went back to school again. And this is kind of the darkness. So just a concept that I really love is the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. And it's basically, the short version is that there's the main character, or the hero, is in their village or their community, and then something big happens and they basically have to leave. So for me, that would be going to Asia, probably would be like that big leaving moment. And then on the journey, they go and they meet mentors and they find cool adventures and they make friends. And then there's this part called the Pit of Despair, I think, or something, Chasm of Despair. I don't know. And it's the darkest point of the journey, but it's also the part where you find the gift. So you conquer the dragon and you find the gift that you're then meant to bring back to your community at the end of the story, which is kind of how the hero's journey completes itself. And so in New Zealand, I had this big transformative moment where I found myself, but I hadn't been to the Chasm of Despair. So when I came back to Santa Clara University, where I went to college, and I was taking this class. It was called Operations Management Information Systems, number 34, like the science and business of tech and blah, 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 blah. It's some meaningless name, but I share it because it's so dry and boring that I need to like communicate that somehow. And this class was, I liked my professor, but the class was so different, so far outside the realm of what I had found in myself that I was interested in. So one of the things that happens when we really find ourselves and we feel like ourselves is that, life after this switch, after this kathunk moment in New Zealand, was like going back to my life before, except for everything was in the wrong place. Like, imagine going into your house and your couch has been moved 3 inches to the left and your kitchen table is 1 inch taller, and just like everything is a little bit wrong, and which ends up like you stub your toe on everything and you trip and it's awful and annoying. And so for me, that was what going back to my life was like. I was like, oh, this is not really how I want life to be, my life to be, which is my life to choose. And so, yeah, there was one moment, and this is kind of how Brandon found me, where I was in this class I didn't like, and I went to the library and was working on this project, studying Boeing, which is an airplane company, and trying to figure out how they could do better. And I was in the library for like 4 hours, just digging through like supply chain analysis and spreadsheets and cost stuff and reading boring PDFs. And it was so awful for my soul, for my authentic self. And it was so grating to my very essence that I just started to get this like total darkness. And I don't remember this very clearly in the moment leading up to it, but I went to class, it was pouring outside, and then I finished class and was walking home. And I got to this point where I was standing at a sidewalk, and the cars were just zooming past. They were going maybe like 45 miles an hour, which is not so fast, but for me in that moment, it looked like really fast. And I remember very clearly standing at this intersection. There's a silver car coming, and a thought comes to my brain, which is, if you step in front of one of those cars, your suffering will end. And it hit me, and time froze. I remember literally like the raindrops that were falling stopped falling. The cars stopped. The lights were reflecting off of the ground. I'd never experienced anything like that since. And it was just this moment, and I was like, oh, wow. And I stepped backward, not forward, which was good. and was like, oh. And then I was just shaking and totally out of my body and dissociated. I remember the light changed and the walk signal came on, and I walked across the street, and I kind of came back to myself like 3 blocks closer to my house. And I'd never had a suicidal thought. I'd wondered why I was alive. I'd wanted to not be alive, but I'd never wanted to die. And there's a big difference between the question of why live. I want to not be alive, which is like, I don't want to live this life. And then I want to die.
Mm-hmm.
I want to die is like now. I want to die now. And that moment of my life was really powerful, because when I stepped back, I made the choice to not end my life. I made the choice to keep living. And to me, that is the most powerful choice that anyone can make, to keep living, to keep being alive, because it empowered me to never ask that question again or never be like, I want to die.
Mm-hmm.
Or even it wasn't an option after that point. I decided once to keep living, and that decision is going to be a forever decision for me. And so for the next, I guess I'll just pause here if there's anything you want to say, because
I'm curious actually if what brought you to that point. Was it spending time in things that weren't aligned with your authentic self? Is that what brought you to that point once more?
Great question. It's a little nuanced because I was spending time doing things that weren't aligned with me for my whole life, basically. What changed was me. I was no longer this. After my kathunk moment in New Zealand, I didn't have the capacity to be a dissociated person. So there's a difference for me between suffering and pain. Pain is the challenge of life, the things that hurt our hearts. Suffering is when we are avoiding that pain or our reality by pretending, by living in the past, by living in the future, by essentially living in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And so up until this point in New Zealand, I was suffering. I was living in a fantasy world. I wasn't really here or aware or present. In New Zealand, after this kathunk moment, I was me. And so as me, coming back into my life, where before I was able to put up with it, honestly, afterward, I was not. I couldn't put up with my own life because it sucked for me. I was like, this is not how I want to be living my life at all. And that was what switched. So it wasn't so much that the things outside of me changed. It was just that I couldn't tolerate living a life that wasn't the life I wanted anymore.
Yeah. It's like taking a fish out of its bowl and putting it in a completely new bowl, but it's not the bowl that changed. It was you that changed inside of the bowl.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I think a very important theme of this entire conversation so far is the theme of choice. How you said you made the choice to continue going, to keep going. You said you made the choice earlier to take charge and get out of your comfort zone. You took the choice to create your own Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really important to say that you didn't just make a choice and then life was all butterflies and happiness.
No.
You made a choice and things got better for a bit, but then the seasons of life came into play, and then you fell down again, and then things got better, and then you fell down again. But things are cyclical, right?
Yeah.
We feel great sometimes, not so great other times. It doesn't mean it's over. It simply means that we're growing, we're learning, or it's time to be aware that maybe we, the fish, have changed.
Yeah.
And we need to get ourselves placed into a different fishbowl.
Right. Or maybe we're a bird now and we're drowning in a fishbowl and we need to go fly. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about my subtitle because I think what you're bringing up is really important. So the subtitle of my book is The Beautiful and Painful Mess of Learning to Love Life. And every word in this is really intentionally chosen. So like you were just talking about the cyclical nature of life, that is always going to be there. That's the mess. we have no idea what's coming down the pipeline at us. You know, right now in my life, I'm a week out of a breakup. My grandpa is really sick with pancreatic cancer. I just had my 24th birthday and I'm launching a book, and I just flew back from Brazil a week ago. And, you know, it's crazy. Like life is crazy and always will be. And the more fully that I put myself into my life, the more messy it gets. But I'm not upset about it, because the beauty and the pain are always found in every moment. And I think that, you know, you're talking about choice. Another big theme of life is change. And we have to kind of navigate choosing in a constantly changing world. And that's really the mess and the beauty and the pain. And so being able to, in the mess, in the constantly changing world, be present with gratitude and with grief, you know, letting go of what has been and also being grateful for it, and then welcoming and being open to what might be, all in this way of being present. So I really like to think about divinity and spirituality in this way of being a channel for it and being a channel to flow in life. So my company that I'm founding, called So Flow, is all about sowing seeds of flow. And flow is this idea for me, not necessarily flow state like most people talk about it, though that is part of it, but it's really like connecting with what is greater and letting it flow through me. So that means being like letting go of the past constantly and being open to the future and being present now. And obviously at 24, I have not perfected this. It's more just like, this is the idea. And by doing that, you cannot attach to things. And instead, you can be present with the beauty and the pain of life. And that is the key of loving life, is to be present with both the beauty and the pain without clinging to the beauty or avoiding the pain, which is very Buddhist. And Buddhism has been a big teacher for me, but I don't really ascribe to one religion. I think that there's a lot to be learned from all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so just that I think is really important to talk about when we're talking about the cyclical nature of needing to integrate a lesson over and over again, or needing to practice something, because it's always going to be this flowing mess. And that's just an important reality to know is true, and then live with and welcome, because it's never going to be different than that.
Yeah, I like how you say, I like a lot of what you just said. I like of what you said about staying open and welcoming of what is to come. I just interviewed the author of The Go-Giver, Bob Berg, and he talks about giving, 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 giving. And the whole conversation was giving. And he said, Brandon, giving is really important. He said, but the other side of the coin is just as important, which is staying open to receive.
Right.
And I was like, wow, fascinating. And so often we have this idea of how we want our life to go. Some of us, right? Some of us might be watching and we don't know, but some of us do. And we're like, it has to turn out this way.
Yep.
Well, what if there was an opportunity or a reality that was actually better than the one that you're conceiving?
Yeah.
And in order to get there, you have to go through the crap and through the pain and through the seasons in order to get there. And it seems painful right now, but when you look back, once you're there, it's like, whoa, all of these things that I didn't choose, or all these things that I didn't ask for, the mess that we're talking about has actually resulted in the beauty that I can now experience and see.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And being able to process trauma, which is often the darkness that lives inside of us, opens us up to being able to be present with the little beauties of life.
Do you believe that we all have trauma?
Yes, of some kind. There's like very few people in my life that I've come across that don't have any kind of trauma. And so let's circle back to this. I believe that there's two kinds of trauma. I think there's micro trauma and macro trauma. Macro trauma is what most people talk about, you know, like sexual assault is a big one in our world, or, you know, a lot of the people who are leaving the Ukraine right now, like those people are experiencing macro trauma, a big event that just totally derails your life and is shocking and goes really deep into they're really hard, painful experiences. Then there is micro trauma, which is more what I dealt with. And it's harder to describe because it's more insidious. And insidious is like a really evil word. And as an author, I'm a big fan of words. So insidious micro trauma are things that over a long period of time in our lives basically make us believe things that aren't true about ourselves. So something that I talk a lot about with clients and coaching are stories that we tell ourselves. And a story that I'm just, realizing I have in my life right now is I'm not worthy of being held. And woof, like that's a big thing to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know where that came from yet, but it's really important to connect those stories that we have. A, have awareness about them, B, accept them, and then C, go back into our lives and be like, where did that come from? And can I let that go? Right? And only through this process of going back into the trauma and facing it and letting it go, can we really then be present with our life without that story, which is the big goal, is to let go of all of these stories and narratives that stop us from being who we are. Yeah.
So that story of, not being worthy of being held, that's very specific. And I guess I'm just curious as to, how do you know that to be true?
Well, how do I know that it's a true story, or how do I know that it?
Well, how do you know that story is at least a part of your reality in this moment? Because you said that.
Yeah. Well, it's like not true, which is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, I am worthy of being held, and so is every other human in existence. I know that it's here for me because it came up for me during a mushroom trip recently, actually, where I was like, oh, that is how I'm feeling right now. And boy, does that stop me from living life the way that I want to.
Wow.
And so being able to speak that into existence without shame and like hold myself in that reality of saying, oh, wow, sometimes I don't feel like I deserve to be held.
Yeah.
How does that stop me? How does that affect my life? And can I love myself through this? Can I heal through this? Can I go through this without rushing it? There's no urgency. And this like takes us back into the story, actually, right? Kind of where we're going. So I'll just follow through. Is that cool? And keep telling the story?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, right around the time after this moment where I was in headlights in the cars and I thought about killing myself, life got a lot better because I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. And suddenly the most important thing in my life is to not do things that aren't aligned with me, or to do only things that are aligned with who I am. And so I started to turn my inner growth outside of me. And that meant like skipping classes that I didn't like and going to classes that I did like, and being able to put my time and energy into the things in my life that mattered to me. And suddenly I became this person who was lit up and energized and really happy. And then someone asked me out for the first time in my entire life. And I was like, whoa, like that happened. And it was really an immediate change. But still, I wasn't like a perfect human being. And sneak peek, I'm still not a perfect human being, and I don't think those exist. But I had this internship, this fellowship that I did that summer after this experience, where it's something that I've always wanted to do. And I was traveling to Ghana for 2 months to work with the people there to help them elevate their income and their economic status. I won't go into it right now, but the point is that I thought that it was something that would really matter to me. I thought that it would be the thing that would give me meaning in life, and that would be my answer to why I live. And I got there and it sucked. Like I didn't want to work at all. It was hot and I had headaches and I hated my job. And it was the exact opposite of what I expected it to be. And so going back to what we were talking about before, like being open to a future that could be better than the one we're imagining, means letting go of these expectations of this being the only thing that will bring us happiness and fulfillment. So I went and did that, and it sucked. And I had to basically clear my slate of all dreams, of all things that I thought would be really important for me to do in my life to be happy and find meaning. And so I came back from that experience, which we could dive into, but I want to just kind of get to the end of the story. So
Yeah.
I came back from that experience and was kind of like just wondering. I was like, what do I do now? You know, but I was still feeling good. I was still feeling happy and like myself, and still doing that aligned living thing. And I ended up getting into my first real-ish relationship, which led to a big heartbreak. And that was because, and this goes back to what we were talking about before, I was looking for my life's meaning in her. Because I had just emptied my slate. I had just lost all direction after I went to Ghana and was like, this is not working. And so I was looking for someone or something to fill the hole of meaning and direction in my life. And it's really easy to fill that hole with a relationship. But that's never going to work, because if you're giving your whole self to another person or to a job or to anything outside yourself, it's eventually going to die or end. Yeah. And then you're going to be sad and shattered. And I'm still learning this lesson today, actually. Like, even as I talk about this, I look back over my last year and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's what happened there. But it left me really heartbroken and shattered. And around the same time, I had just started using psychedelics, using mushrooms. And I had this experience at this point of being on mushrooms and realizing I am enough as I am.
Yeah.
And that was a huge moment.
Was that your first trip?
Second trip.
Okay.
Yeah. And it unlocked me to live my life without looking for something outside of myself to fill it. And around the same time, I started reading Old Path, White Clouds by Thich Nhat Hanh. So he just died recently, but he's a Buddhist monk. And I also read this book called The 5 Invitations by Frank Ostaseski. And that book is all about death and dying, also from a Buddhist perspective. And I also read a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. And that book is about basically having, like, not needing anything else to be happy and putting oneself first. And in the midst of all these books and the mushroom experience, and then I did another mushroom experience, I just had this like utter sense of peace. And this was right as COVID was starting. There was a lot of like BLM stuff going on, which I'm a big advocate for. And the world was beginning this chaotic mess that it's been in for the last 2 years. But this sense of peace just came over me as I started to really just settle into the present moment without expectation, with presence, and with attention. And I remember sitting at a bench at my college campus, which I write about in my book, and just watching the wind and the squirrels and watching people walk past and slowing way down. I'm just slowing down now, even for you. And I started to realize that as every moment comes into existence, it is leaving. As every life is born, it's dying. There's this constant flow of life and death, birth and dying. And yet, in the bigger picture, there is life, which is not dying. You know, even climate change, even, you know, war. Life itself is going to go on. It's going to be here in another 1,000,000 years. And it gave me this perspective of, oh, I am part of this grand unfolding, this evolution of life. We all are, each one of us. And that means that even if I don't know what my purpose is, I'm here as a part of this unfolding. And life is glorious. Life is beautiful. You know, when we find that in the way that tree branches grow, or in watching a bird fly by, or in the wind or the ocean or sand, like everything that we see in nature is connected. And we are part of that connection. And it's a very psychedelic, very mushroom thing to say, but it's
true,
also
though.
true. Yeah. And so you know, you asked me earlier, did I ever answer the question, why live? And we're getting closer at this point in my story. And another thing happened, which is my last story that I'll share, but I want to pause again, just see if there's anything you want to say.
I think it's everything you're saying is it's great. What's this last story that ties it all?
Yeah, so I came home after I graduated from college and I went hiking up to the top of a mountain, and I just had this urge to camp in the middle of nowhere. And so I walked up to the top of a mountain, and I live in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and it was summertime, it was beautiful out, and I'm lying on a tarp at the top of a mountain, and I just had finished reading the book, The 5 Invitations, that I talked about. And I again started sobbing, and I was looking out over the sunset, and it was beautiful. And I started writing in my journal, and I said, "Dear God, I must die, but Lord, am I grateful for this life that I have," or something like that. And we don't have to get into the whole God concept right now, because that's probably too much, but
that's another episode.
Suffice it to say, God is like, life is connection for me. And I wrote that, and then I just felt this total grief and gratitude, this merging of the two. So I was crying, and then I was laughing, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, but I'm also alive, and how fucking cool is that? And then I leaned back onto my tarp and was lying there, and I took out my headphones, which were playing classical music, and I just kind of fell asleep. And I had this moment when I was sleeping, and I woke up kind of in between sleep and not sleep, and I heard this noise coming from the bushes. And I immediately, instinctively knew what it was. And then my rational brain played catch up. And my rational brain was like, oh, well, it's too consistent to be a bird, and it's too loud to be a mammal. So that's a snake, and a big snake. And I stood up really instinctually and walked back, and was standing at the edge of a cliff and looking into the bushes in front of me. And I see this thick rattlesnake sliding through the bushes, like not 2 feet from where my head just was. And I was thinking about life and death and rebirth. And then this rattlesnake was just here, right as I had accepted my own mortality. And it was this crazy moment that you only could ever like read about or like see in a story, but it happened to me. And this rattlesnake came and passed, and it didn't shake its rattle at me, which meant that it wasn't scared. I was just there with it. And it was, you know, beautiful and also terrifying. And in that moment, I was like, I don't want to die yet. Like, I love my life. And so I packed up all of my stuff and ran down the mountain and back home. And that rattlesnake, being greeted and being present with that rattlesnake, was maybe one of the most powerful things that's ever happened to me. It was such like divine coincidence or divine whatever serendipity that rattlesnake came right as I accepted my mortality, that I have never been able to forget that story.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the answer of why live. And the answer, in the face of death, in the face of not just my mortality, but mortality generally of all of us and of this constant shifting change, is just to be here with whatever is. You know, why live? To live. You know, what's happening in this moment? How am I feeling in this moment? Am I sad? Am I happy? Am I tired? It's all, you know, ordinary.
Yeah.
And yet with intention, with attention, it becomes magic. This life that we live.
It is magic. Yeah.
It is magic to be here, to see, to hear, to have agency, to be able to say, I'm going to go for a walk and then walk. Like, that's amazing. And so, yes, like you were saying at the beginning, we all have different reasons. We all have different purposes. But at a more base level, the only answer that's true for all of us is just to be, to live. And what that looks like for everyone is totally different. But it's really like the only answer that I can come up with. And sometimes I remember it and sometimes I forget it because I'm like, the magic thing about a book is that you can write it and it can be like true and factual and there. And then, you know, the life is a lot more messy than a story or a book. But
yeah,
that's the answer that I've found for myself. And I don't really want to push it on anyone else. Like, I don't know if it's right for anyone else. So I don't think it's necessarily the answer, but it's where I've landed.
Yeah. I think this entire experience is magic. Like what we were saying, the fact that we can talk to each other and understand each other, but really we're just making noises with our mouths, and we just happen to understand what that means. You know, we use our bodies, and right now we're like, I'm not anywhere near you. Like, where are you physically right now?
Massachusetts.
Yeah, so we're kind of close. I'm in upstate New York, but like we're miles and miles apart, yet this is a possibility. How? I don't know. I just kind of bought the things and put them together, and it works, right? And like you said, we forget that,
yes,
you know, we're in this one present moment, but then we remember and we reground ourselves, and then we forget again, and then we reground ourselves. But we're constantly training ourselves more and more and more to be in this moment. And that's what I believe. You hear these people who aren't self-proclaimed, but you hear about these people who are quote unquote enlightened beings. And really, I don't truly fully understand it, but what I do understand and think that I understand is that they are more so being in the present moment that they're in, and they're experiencing, and they're okay and accepting of what comes their way. And your story is profound. And I know it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what people will get when they read your book. Again, the name of Faolan's book, guys, is Why Live? The Beautiful and Painful Mess of Learning to Love Life. You can find it on Amazon. There's going to be links in the description and or the comments, depending on where you're watching and listening. And Faolan, my last question for you is, at this stage and chapter in your life, what does the future look like for you? What's your mission at this stage in your life?
Yeah. It's very poignant for me right now because, I'll answer succinctly. My mission right now is to cultivate sacredness. And what that means is kind of, I just envision it as a garden. You know, if you plant a seed and then watch it grow and it's bearing fruits, you know, being present to the extraordinary nature of a tomato is a metaphor for what our lives can be. When we plant a seed, when I plant a seed with a client, or plant a seed with my book, or plant a seed by listening to someone, it puts a seed in their garden. And that garden will cultivate this seed and then grow it into something extraordinary. And it might be ordinary like a tomato, but when we pay attention to it with sacredness, with presence, then life changes. It becomes sacred. And it is. And I think that's something that our world has forgotten, that life is sacred. We got so wrapped up in this capitalist rat race of, you know, urgency and growth and potential. But it's really just about the sacredness of now and connection and being.
Well said. This has been quite a sacred conversation and a really great way to start my day. And I thank you for that. And I hope that it's the same for everyone listening. I would guess that it is, because this has been amazing. Faolan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I thank you for coming on the show today and sharing all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. And thank you for everyone for listening.
That was a conversation. And we dove deep into a lot of learnings that you can take away from Faolan's story, a lot of lessons. Maybe it caused you to think about what a new meaning for your life could be, or even what stage of your life you're in right now. Are you in the mess of life? Are you in the beauty of life? Are you in the middle? Are you experiencing both? It probably is a little bit of both, but I'm sure that no matter who you are, you took something away from this conversation. And I implore you to continue this journey and pick up Faolan's book on Amazon. I'm grabbing my copy. It just came out. That's why I don't have it yet. Just launched You can find the links in the description. Again, the name of Faolan's book is Why Live? The Beautiful and Painful Mess of Learning to Love Life. And maybe it will help you to discover a new insight or learning for yourself. If you found any value from this show, please share it with one person who could use it at this stage in their life. And if you're watching and listening, thank you so much. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.